Hi everybody, and welcome to this week's video on chasing psychological safety. This week we're going to talk to you a bit about learning from failure. The reason that we're inspired this week to talk about learning from failure is we've been thinking about the pandemic and psychological safety. Has it grown? Has it diminished? What's changed for psychological safety during the last 12 months? And this is a really timely moment, isn't it? We're coming up to a lot of the anniversaries of the pandemic. What have we learned? And how important is learning going to be to getting to or back to really high levels of psychological safety as we emerge over the next 12 months from this crazy year that we've had? So what we really wanted to do was talk to you about tips for learning from failure, and just to reinforce how important it is to have that as part of your culture, but not just to pay lip service to it, to actually find ways to make it real, not on paper, to actually make it part of everyday's work that you do.
Right. It's a complicated topic. And the reason I think it's complicated is that we have a hefty amount of human debt when it comes to learning. And that's a controversial opinion that some people might not be happy with me expressing. But I feel like we, in retrospect, we have traversed a few tens of years of working in the knowledge industry with essentially an attitude to learning that was a lot more fixed than it really should be, in the sense that we were expected to come to the workplace with a certain amount of knowledge, which we had acquired academically or from other previous experiences, and then apply that. And then during our work involvement, we would increase that more or less with a course here and there, a training here and there. And I think learning and development professionals would agree that they've had an uphill battle and putting learning at the very heart of the organization, in the sense that it had been often banished to something that was done after your to-dos, after the things that were necessary, and a little bit of a second-grade citizen, which obviously is incorrect and not serving us well in this particular situation, in which we have ever-changing priorities, in which there's not enough stability to be basing yourself on a certain amount of knowledge, in which we have to react fast and keep innovating and creating and experimenting. So for this new reality, for our VUCA times, the type of learning we need is a lot more flexible and a lot more continuous, and not this fixed mindset. And maybe the best example of this is how learning features in the idea of agile and that continuous feedback you get from consumers back to your people, and then being able to create the things that are most wanted. So if anywhere, organizations that were agile enough, they were able to kind of crack the idea of learning in a much more hands-on fashion, because it is inbuilt in the very concept of agility. Whereas organizations who weren't even discussing changing towards agile have had trouble with it because of the sequential nature. We at People Not Tech, for instance, are very fortunate because being very agile just means that we continuously learn and we continuously move. Obviously, we don't expect huge organizations to have our flexibility in building product and learning on the fly. But at the same time, we recognize how very important it is to do continuous learning, continuous improvement, and do so in an agile way.
Absolutely. And that idea of innovation and learning is one of the key concepts at the center of learning from failure, and that continuous learning, short feedback loops. But it's really important to understand, and there's a really good tool that you can look at, which is called the Learning from a Failure Spectrum. And a good reference point for this is Amy Edmondson's book, Teaming, which we always recommend, along with the Fearless Organization, as books to read. But that spectrum really clearly lays out that, there's learning from failure along a spectrum. So at the top, you've got you know, the purest form, the one that we're always thinking about when we think about learning from failure, which is, you know, if you're in a pure innovation environment, a kind of laboratory environment, for example. So where you, you know, where you need to innovate continuously, where the space is designed so that you do make mistakes because you're continually pushing for the newest, most cutting edge solutions that can, you know, save lives or create new technology or whatever it might be. So that's great. And that's at the one end of the spectrum. And in that environment, people are really empowered to learn from failure. But then there's a spectrum, and all the way down that spectrum, it becomes less and less safe to learn from failure. And it becomes less and less safe to fail, which ironically causes people to fail more. So it relates to the organizational conditions that people have got and the kind of team environments that they work in as well. So there's mistakes kind of in the middle of the spectrum and failure that we can learn from. But we need to recognize the causes of that failure and the barriers to people learning from failure. Often in those lower areas, failure is happening because of the organizational factors around people. You know, the fact that they haven't got a good line management relationship, the fact that they're in a toxic team environment, the fact that they're completely disengaged and demotivated because of the organizational environment they're in. And right at the bottom of that spectrum, failure can even occur deliberately because somebody is so disengaged by the environment that they are in. And that is obviously the one in many ways that we need to learn from fastest. So there's a really clear correlation between why failure occurs and what we need to learn from that and how fast we need to learn from that as well. So that's something that it's really, really important to be aware of when you're thinking about learning from failure. It certainly isn't cookie cutter, one size does not fit all. We need to investigate what the environment is that we are learning from failure within in order to get the right learning.
Precisely. So in a sense, there's almost, if you want to think of it in simplistic terms, there's almost a good type of failure and the bad type of failure. Yeah. And the good type of failure is the one you learn from, the one that's been, that's meant that at the end of it, you can share, you can take a lesson from, you can move forward. It's the one that should be powering all a posteriori experiences and experiments. And obviously the bad one is the one in which it's either done out of a malicious spirit or even it's done with no actual result that was moving the team forward. So some of the things that are practical that you could be doing in terms of learning are multiple, and you know there's a lot out there about it. Quite some of these things are captured in some of the plays. If you're one of our clients watching this, then you can find it under the Courage Hackathon. You can find it under the Speak Up advice here and there, and you can also find an entire play called A Learning Huddle, which has multiple suggestions of things you can do so that you reaffirm the permission to learn, and make sure that you kind of reframe around good mistakes. So which brings us to the fact that there are practical things you can do, such as I said, the things in the playbook, but also you could potentially do what some of the organizations we work with are doing, which is send your employees to a fuck up night. Which is an amazing concept where people simply come on the stage and just share experiences and stories of times when they failed and they learned. And that just sending your people over there it sends a very clear signal that there's organizational permission in learning. But again, framing the correct learning is really important. We don't want to incentivize the wrong type of mistakes and failure. We just want people to feel safe to learn and feel safe to share what they've been learning. So yes, we will talk to you next week, potentially with more tips of things that you could be doing. But if not, kind of meanwhile, keep learning and keep being psychologically safe enough to be sharing it.
Yep. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.